Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay, the end of the Megillah, the Torah, the Megillah tells us, L'kayim aleihem eshimei Purim eila, to observe, to enact these days of Purim, there's Badehim in their proper time, Kersher Kiyam aleihem Mordechai Yehudi, Esther Hamalka, as it was observed by Mordechai Yehudi and Esther Hamalka, but Kersher Kiyam al nafsham, the way they accepted upon themselves, Al-Zarim and their future generations, Divrei Hatzomos v'Zakosam, the words of the tzomos of the fast days, v'Zakosam, and their cries. And the question is, here we're talking about the enactment of the holiday of Purim. So what does it mean to say Divrei Hatzomos v'Zakosam? Now, there are a number of different opinions of halacha. The opinion of Rabbeinu Tam and the Shiltos is that Taanis Esther is not just a later custom, but Taanis Esther, it was decreed in the Megillah. And when it talks here about observing and accepting the Yemei Hatzomos v'Zakosam, it has reference to the fasts that the Jewish people observed during at the time of Mordechai and Esther. According to some, it's based on the fact that the days that the Jews went to war, so there was a fast day, asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help the Jews, those that were fighting in defense of the Jewish community in Persia, to be at their aid. And others say that it's a fast day commemorating the fasts that Esther decreed at that time. The fasts were in Nisan, so they do it on other days. It's discussed in the poskim. Some have a special fast day that they observe commemorating those fast days. And it's interesting, the sheet of the Shiltos and Rabbeinu Tam is that Taanis Esther, the fast of Esther, which is tomorrow, is considered it should halachically be considered a stringent fast day, which is mentioned in the Nevi'im, is mentioned in the prophets, prophets being the Megillah. So because of that, when they accepted Purim on themselves, they accepted Taanis Esther on themselves to commemorate the fast days that were fasted at that time. Now, the Rishonim ask a question against Rabbeinu Tam and against the Shiltos, who say that the fast of Esther is a fast that was decreed in the time of Mordechai and Esther. The question is because Yud Gimel Taima, now during the second Beis Hamikdash, there were many different miracles that took place, and those days were decreed as holidays. These are days that you're not allowed to fast. These are days that you're not allowed to give hespedim, to give eulogies. So, and one of the days listed is the 13th of Adar. Now, the 13th of Adar was a holiday during the second Beis Hamikdash. So we have a little bit of a contradiction. On one hand, we're told that on the 13th of Adar, we are required to fast because the Nevi'im, the prophets, instituted as a fast day, commemorating the fast days that took place in the time of Mordechai and Esther. And it was instituted in the time of Mordechai and Esther before the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash, before the second Commonwealth. So how can we on one hand say that it's a holiday at that time? Now, these holidays that existed during the Second Commonwealth, the way we paskin, ceased to exist as holidays with the second Churban, with this destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. But we have a contradiction. On one hand, we say that it's a holiday, and because it's a holiday, it's a mitzvah. Because it's a holiday, you're not allowed to fast. On the other hand, we say that it was decreed as a fast day in which you're required to fast. And according to the opinion of Rabbi Tam and the opinion of the Shiltos, it's a stringent fast day. So how are we to resolve this contradiction? And I saw in the name of the Netziv that the Netziv says that even according to the Shultas and Rabbeinu Tam, it was decreed as a fast day, but it did not have to be, and was left up to the Batei Dinim, I assume, of the future generations to decide which day, but no particular day was set aside as a fast day. The future generations, the Batei Dinim of the future generations, the legal halachic authorities of later generations would decide for their particular generation when that fast day should be. So that fast day did not have to be on Yud Gimel Adar. It doesn't mention Yud Gimel Adar in the Megillah as a fast day. But the truth of the matter is that is somewhat difficult, because the Gemara says in Megillah that why is it that you Gimel Adar in certain situations they were able to read the Megillah, because Yom Kihilel Akolhi, which Rabbeinu Tam understands to mean it was a fast day, was a day people fasted, unless he means to say that at that time they fasted because of the war. To commemorate that fast, there has to be a fast day and another day. But future Batei Dinim will decide when that fast day is. And later generations, when the holiday of Yud Gimel Adar was no longer there, they instituted Yud Gimel Adar, the 13th, again as a fast day. Okay, but so I want to suggest, in any case, a different answer than the one offered by the Netziv. Now, so basically the question is, how on one hand can we consider it a fast day that was instituted in the time of the Nevi'im, and on the other hand say that it was a holiday, one of the holidays of the Megillas Taanis that existed in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, it's interesting. Others explain this pasuk as not having reference to Taanis Esther or to the fast days that Esther fasted or a commemoration of those fast days, but they explain it that it has reference to the 4 fast days of Tzom Gedalia, Asar B'Teves, Shavasa B'Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av. And more or less, there are 2 ways to understand the pasuk, if we understand it this way, that they instituted the holiday of Purim, like the fast days like the fast days like the 4 fast days that we have over the Churban. In other words, just like the Jewish people accepted upon themselves, this is the way the Ibn Ezra mentions it, the fast days, the 4 fast days commemorating the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, so too the Jewish people accepted upon themselves the holiday of Purim. And that's how they explained this pasuk. Okay, but the question is, why was it necessary to draw to compare Purim to the 4 fast days? If anything, it would seem that they're the very opposite. It's true. Both of them were accepted by the Jewish people in later generations. But it would have been just enough to say that the Jewish people accepted Purim as a holiday, celebrating their salvation. Why was it important for the Megillah to say, like the previous acceptance of the 4 fast days? And others understand it in a very similar fashion, but to a certain sense, they rededicated themselves to the observance of these 4 fast days, or they expanded the requirement of these 4 fast days, even in a period when there are no decrees against the Jewish people at that time. But if we understand it that way, why do we bring in the 4 fast days? So there must be a connection between Purim and the 4 fast days, even if you say they expanded it. In other words, originally the 4 fast days are only were only in time of the 4 fast days are only in times when there are decrees against the Jewish people. But they accepted upon themselves Tisha B'Av as a requirement, and the other fast days they accepted upon themselves to observe it not as a requirement, as days of voluntary fast days. What is all that? What does the 4 fast days have to do with Purim? Why is it in the Megillah? Now, it's interesting that the Shulchan Aruch paskins that one should keep fasting. This is it's brought down the Rishonim, the Ravid, and Talmud Deim, that when one fasts. Now, the Ramah's opinion is that Tzom Gedalia is only a custom, a later custom. And in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, they didn't fast on Tzom Gedalia. They didn't on Taanis Esther. They didn't fast on Taanis Esther. It was only a later custom, and because it was a later custom, so there was no problem. In other words, while the second Beis Hamikdash was in existence, one was not allowed to fast on the 13th of Adar. But after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and the holidays that were instituted during the second Beis Hamikdash, which is called the holidays of Megillas Taanis, so it came to an end. So then the Jewish people, in order to give more feeling into Purim, accepted Yud Gimel Adar, the 13th of Adar, as a day of fasting and praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say slichas on those days. So we have to understand even that practice. Why was it important to institute after the Churban this day of Yud Gimel Adar? Now, Another question is very strange, certainly strange in the tradition of my family, this idea, but it's mentioned the name of the Ari, that the Yom Kipurim, Yom Kippur, which is the ultimate day of fasting, should be understood Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. Now, if there are any 2 days in the Jewish calendar that are different, I would suggest that the 2 days that are different is Yom Kippur and Purim. So how can the Ari suggest that the word Yom Kippurim means a day like Purim? What is the equation between Yom Kippur, when we fast and we cry and we beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we say vidui, and Purim, a day of festivity, a day of eating, a day of drinking, a day of sharing food? What is the connection that would cause the Ari to say Yom Kippurim? I saw in the name of my uncle that, in other words, because Purim is a holiday, a day of lottery, because Haman Harasha, he made a lottery to determine which day, which month and which day to kill the Jewish people. And the lottery fell out on Adar. And he took great pride. Our sages tell us he was happy that it fell on Adar, because Adar was the day, it was the month in which Moshe Rabbeinu, the outstanding Navi, the giver of the Torah, the greatest of the Jewish people, passed away. And the way Chazal say, but he didn't realize that Zayin Adar was not only Moshe Rabbeinu's yahrzeit, the day he died, but it was also Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday. So, but in any case, but the day was selected by lottery. And we know that on Yom Kippur, there were 2 goats offered as a carbon, as a sacrifice. One goat was designated as the carbon Lashem, the goat that was sacrificed in the Beis Hamikdash, and the other goat was taken to the desert and was thrown off a cliff. And that was the Soyer Azazel. And it had on it the sins, figuratively, the sins of all the Jewish people. And the determination, these were 2 goats that looked exactly alike. But the determination of which goat was Lashem was sacrificed in the Beis Hamikdash, and which goat was La'azazel was made by means of lottery. So there is a certain analogy, and my uncle goes in to explain what the significance of that analogy is, but that perhaps could serve as the reason why it's called Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. Okay, I want to suggest I would like to suggest a different explanation. Now, it's also brought down that that when it comes to reading, that when a person is fasting on Taanis Esther, they should continue fasting into Purim till after the Megillah is read. In other words, l'chatchila, The Megillah should be read while we're still in a state of fasting. And we have to understand, why is that necessary? Why isn't one allowed to take a drink of water under normal circumstances? And each person should ask his Rav whether what applies to him or her. But the preferable situation is to remain fasting till after the Megillah has been read completely. And the question is, why should it not be permitted to take a drink of water to break the fast? Why do you have to wait until after the Megillah is read? And what's interesting is the Ravid, the Tamim Deim, he considered it so important that he says, now it's well known that the Ravid's opinion is that while in certain situations, one is allowed to daven Ma'ariv early, but it's not something that one should do l'chatchila. The Ravid's opinion is that should only be done under special circumstances, if there's special reasons. But it should not be done as a regular routine. Nevertheless, the Ravid says that it's better to daven Ma'ariv early on Motzei, toward the evening of the end of Taanis Esther of Yud Gimel. If somebody has difficulty fasting and not break their fast before the reading of the Megillah. So we see that it's very important that the Megillah be read according to the Ravid when a person is in a state of fasting. And we have to understand, why is it that way? Now, the Gemara in Megillah, Tav Daled, says, Chayav Adam likros es ha-Megillah b'yom u'lishnosa b'layla. A person is required to read the Megillah in the day, and the way the Gemara concludes, and to repeat it, a person is required to read the Megillah in the day and repeat it in the night and repeat it in the day. And the Gemara mentions two psukim for it. One pasuk is Elokaya Ekra Yom, God, I call out in the daytime. Krayoma velo sana, and you did not answer. V'layla velo dumyali, and by night there is no respite for me. In other words, I cried day and night. And it's talking about the time of Mordechai and Esther. It's talking after the Gzeros, after the decrees of Haman. Lahashmid la'arog la'abed es kol ha'Yehudim. So it's speaking of the Jewish people crying out to God day and night. And to commemorate the crying out day and night, the halacha is that we should read the Megillah day and night. It's interesting, many of the Mefarshim, the Gvuras Ari, and others say that the original takana of reading the Megillah was only in the day. But later on, because of this pasuk in Tehillim, to commemorate the crying out that took place day and night, so they instituted that the Megillah should be read both in the day and the night. And we have to understand, why is it that the reading of the Megillah is identified with the crying of day and night that the Jewish people did during during the time after the Gzeira, after the decrees of Haman HaRasha. And the second thing is, they give another pasuk, and that pasuk is Leman Yizamercha Chavod Lo Yidom Elokai Laolam Adeka. So that my soul might sing to you and not be still, Hashem, my God, forever I will thank you. So V'lo Yidom, that's identified, I guess, with a person going to sleep. So it's identified with night. So I sing out to you day and night. So to commemorate the praises, the praise God for the salvation, I sing out to him day and night. So to commemorate the singing and the praise that was given to God for the salvation, we read the Megillah day and night. And this probably should be understood from the perspective of the Megillah being a form of Hallel. The Gemara mentions, why is it that we don't say Hallel, on Purim? And the Gemara gives all kinds of answers. But the first answer is, Kriyasa Zuhi Hilula. The reading of the Megillah also serves as its Hallel. The Gemara gives other answers, because it's a miracle outside Eretz Yisrael, because they were still slaves of servants of Achashverosh. But we could suggest that even according to these other answers, that's why we couldn't have regular Hallel. But the Megillah could serve as the Hallel even according to the other answers. But the question is, why not a regular Hallel? So they give other answers. So the Megillah is to be seen as Hallel. Hallel is a form of praise to God, of thanking God. So because of this, and since in Tehillim it's mentioned that about one giving praise to God day and night, and the Jewish people gave praise to God, obviously, for the salvation from the decrees of Haman HaRasha, day and night. So to commemorate that fact, we read the Megillah day and night. Now, so we see here that two psukim. I once, many years ago, published an article about it. And since that time, I've seen that more or less, probably with differences, I don't remember clearly now, since that time, I saw that the same idea was that I expressed, an idea that my uncle had mentioned out, that they published many of his shiurim. So the idea is that the Megillah actually is a double commemoration. On one hand, it's a commemoration of giving thanks and praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On the other hand, the Megillah is commemorating, which the Megillah certainly talks out about how Mordechai put sackcloths on, and he went b'socheir, and he went out and cried. For Hayir Shushan Navocha. They were overcome with gloom. But it was gloom that was accompanied with tzedakah, with crying out to God. And afterwards, the Ir Shushan was full of joy. So the two states, in a certain sense, the Megillah read in the day and night. commemorates the two different situations that existed in Shushan, and to a certain degree in B'chol Medinos Hamelech, that the Jewish people had. The Jewish people had in the time of Mordechai and Esther. Now, there is a very interesting Rambam in the Hagdama to the Minyan HaKotzer, and the Rambam says there he was talking there about the significance of mitzvahs the mitzvahs that were enacted later, after the time of Matan Torah. Shahneviyin in Bezdin Tiknum Vitzivam Likros HaMegillah. The Nevi'im, together with Bezdin, instituted to read the Megillah Bo Nosa in its proper time. Why? Kedei lahaskir shvachav shalav kadosh baruch hu, in order to mention the praises of God, v'tshuo sha'asa lanu, and the salvations that He did us. Karv l'shavosenu, He was close to our prayers, to our cries to Him. Kedei levarcho, in order to bless Him, ulahalo, to praise Him, u'chedei lahodia ledoros habayim, and to let future generations know that it's true what God promised us in the Torah, that God is close to our prayers at all times, that our God is close to us, to our prayers. He always listens to our prayers. And I think this part of the idea here is we don't give up hope. If because of our belief in God, not just our belief in God, but our belief that our prayers are grounded not just in asking God, but in the special relationship that exists between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, in a sense, we could say that the two commemorations, of Purim, commemorated the crying and the screaming out to God, and commemorating the joy of the salvation is really one. We are not just celebrating the facts that our lives were saved. We are celebrating the special relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the relationship that God listens to our prayers. And the truth of the matter is, when you take a look at whereas Purim focuses on that, take a look at Pesach. When you read the Parsha, of the Parsha of Bikurim, and in the Parsha of the Bikurim, so the Parsha of Bikurim, so it talks about the hardships that the Jewish people had in Egypt, the Gzerot, the decrees against them, against their children, their enslavement. And then toward the end, about the miracles and how the Jewish people were freed. And at what point does it turn over? Batal Shavasam Elokim. Vayishma Hashem es kolenu, God heard our voice, as it says in Shemos, Vatal Shavasam Elokim. Their cries, their beseeching God was heard by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was heard by God. So in a sense, we have to identify the miracles as an answer to prayer. And the Megillah emphasizes that point. And in a sense, That is what Taanis Esther is. Taanis Esther, in a sense, is not just a Taanis by itself. There is a discussion, actually, in the Rishonim, whether one has to fast Taanis Esther in a year, that there are 2 Adars. In a year, there are 2 Adars. Do you have to fast Taanis Esther also on your Gimel of Adar Rishon or not? But we paskin that only on your Dalit. My uncle said that's because we paskin that Taanis Esther has a special connection to Purim. If it's not right next to Purim, it loses its significance. In a sense, to a certain degree, it's a preparation for Purim. And it's interesting, the Rambam, about when he talks about the miracle of Pesach, so he says that the mitzvah is not just in re-experiencing the Chayros, but it's in re-experiencing the Avdus. And I assume because you can't appreciate the Chayros unless you know the Avdus, unless you know the servile situation, the slavery that the Jews underwent in Egypt. You can't appreciate the chayros of Pesach, the freedom of Pesach. And we could say that in a similar vein, we need Taanis Esther to appreciate Purim, because Purim is a celebration not just of the fact that our lives were saved, but Purim is a expression of appreciation, that Purim is expressive of the special relationship that exists between God and the Jewish people. And in other words, that God listens and wants our tefillos, and that God reacts to our tefillos. And in a sense, to a certain degree, we could suggest that we could suggest that Taanis Esther is a day that we show our faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we could suggest that we fast, whether it was as a result of the takana of the Nevi'im, whether it was instituted by the prophets in the time of Mordechai and Esther, or even if it was a later custom, we could suggest that in a sense, Taanis Esther is an introduction to Purim. And as such, we could suggest that according to Rabbeinu Tam, Taanis Esther is because we know the outcome, because we experience the outcome. The outcome is not something that did not yet happen. It is something that will happen. It's something that will happen and happened already. Something that happened already. So because of that, Taanis Esther could be seen not as a sad fast day, but it has a certain sense of happiness and joy associated with it. It's not just a day of hope, but a day that commemorates the fact that what we hope for took place. So it's a happy fast day. And if it's a happy fast day, we could suggest that there is no problem in fasting, even though it was a holiday. So that's how we could perhaps answer the question of Rabbeinu, against Rabbeinu Tam and the Shiltos. And we could say that this, in the case, situation, we could explain perhaps the Ari, that Yom Kippurim, that Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. Because Yom Kippur, yes, we fast and we cry out to God. But according to some shittas, according to some opinions, it's a day of simcha. It's a day of joy. Because we're looking forward to our salvation from the Yom Hadin. We're looking forward to HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepting our tefillas. So it's a Yom Kippurim. Purim is a day of celebration that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts our tefillas. So Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. It's a day dedicated to tefillah. And we know that the post can bring down that Motzei Yom Kippur, the Suda that we eat, is a celebration, the Motzei Yom Kippur is a celebration because we feel confident that our tefillos were accepted. As a matter of fact, that sense of confidence is there. When in the Avoda we talk about the Yom Tov, the celebration, after the Kohen Gadol finished the Avoda, there was a certain sense of confidence that we had. Why? Because of the tefillos, because of the Avoda, because of the service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yom Kippur brings about that sense of closeness. That sense of closeness. And even the 4 fast days, and the 4 fast days are not dedicated to the idea of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As a matter of fact, Tisha B'Av, we say Nistamat Tfilasi, and there is many tefillos. And my uncle said that's the reason why on Tisha B'Av we don't say Ne'ilah. It's a day of sadness. But we know, Chazal tell us that it says Tzom Revi, V'Tzom HaChamishi, V'Tzom HaShvi, V'Tzom HaAsiri, Yeh Lebeis Yehuda, L'Sosam L'Simcha, U'Lemoadim Tovim, Aval Emes V'Hashalom Ahav. So, Karaluhu Tzom, V'Karaluhu Sosam V'Simcha. On one hand, you say it's a fast day. On the other hand, in Gemara and Rosh Hashanah says, you say it's days of joy. And the Gemara says, Bizman sheyesh gzeros, when there are decrees against the Jewish people. When there are decrees against the Jewish people, so then it's Tzom, it's a fast days. These days are fast days. And Bizman sheyesh shalom, Bizman sheyesh shalom, when there's peace. Now there is a machlokes. What peace means? Between the Rambam and one hand, and Rashi and Rabbeinu Hananel on the other hand. Rashi and Rabbeinu Hananel say Bizman sheyesh shalom means that when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, according to Rashi and Rabbeinu Hananel, during the second Beis Hamikdash, the 4 fast days became holidays. Question is, why should the 4 fast days become holidays? Okay. So the tragedy that took place in those 4 fast days is not there anymore. But why should it be a holiday? But obviously, it's as a result of the mourning and the tzedakah and the crying out to God. Tisha B'Av after Mincha and the other fast days, the slichos, that the Beis Hamikdash had been rebuilt. So, in a sense, there's a certain identification between Purim and the 4 fast days. Because the 4 fast days, true Tisha B'Av, in the morning is Avelis, is morning. But in the afternoon, when we say Vayichal, and we scream out, Hashem, Hashem, Kel Rachum B'Chanon. And we say, Anenu. So it's days of tzedakah. It's days of crying out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's interesting, there was, I saw in my uncle Sherman's brought down, he saw it in, I think in Shuvas Hagonim, that in the old days, even during the kinnos, many used to couple the kinnos together with slichos. So it's the idea that the tefillos, the crying out to God, the tzedakos, and even the crying out to God, it brings about God listening to what we're saying. And that brings the salvation, the restoration of the Beis Hamikdash. And even according to the Rambam's opinion, so then we can understand very well the connection between the 4 fast days and Purim. In other words, the purpose of the 4 fast days is to become a day like Purim. Why will they become holidays? Because these are the days we were mispalel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We daven to God. We ask God for His help. And it is as a result of these days that we achieved His help. So that's the connection. But I think along the same lines, we can take it a step further. Especially according to Rambam Shita, the Rambam's opinion is that even Bayesheni, as I explained, was part of Golus. It was just a lull in the Golus. And Tisha B'Av was observed even during Bayesheni, even during the second Beis Hamikdash. And when will they all become holidays? They will only become holidays in Yemos HaMashiach, when Mashiach comes. So what is it? What is the idea behind these fast days becoming holidays? Now, it's coming Shabbos, the coming week will be Parshas Parah. And I've talked many times, what is the significance of Parshas Parah? And we know that the Chazal tell us that the Parah Duma was a Paraduma was a kapara, was the atonement for the Egel Hazav. A para, the Egel is a baby cow, and the paraduma was someone who came in contact with the dead, and they became defiled, so they weren't able to come in contact with areas of the Beis Hamikdash. They weren't able to touch kachim. They weren't able to touch trumos, foods of holiness. They were contaminated. And they went through a process of tahara. And the question is, what is the idea behind this process of tahara? Now, the cow that was slaughtered was a red cow, and completely red, and it was slaughtered, and it was burnt. And when someone came tamei, when someone came contaminated for coming in contact or in an area that was covered with where there was a dead body, so he became tamei. He became contaminated from his closeness or his contact with the dead body. So he would undergo a process of a Kohen sprinkling the ashes of the cow that was burnt together with Mayim Chayim, with living waters, and of course he would go to a mikveh, and that was the process of tahara. What's the idea of the process of tahara? What's the idea behind mikveh? But a person, when he goes into a mikveh, they have to put their head below the water surface. And below the water surface, we are in a milieu where one cannot survive. And the tahara takes place as he lifts his head out of the water. So in other words, when you go through a process of non-survival into a process of survival, that's the process of tahara. The process of tahara is going from non-survival to a situation of non-survival into a situation of survival. And in a sense, that's the idea behind the ashes. The ashes represent destruction, the ultimate destruction. And Mayim Chayim, living waters, just by the nature of its words. And Mayim Chayim usually is waters that come from bodies of waters that were moving. So it represents life. And we know what is Purim based on. Purim is based on Amalek. And what does the Torah tell us? What does the Torah tell us about Amalek? You were tired and worn out and didn't fear God. And my uncle asks, it seems to be an identification. You're tired and worn out and didn't fear God. With some say below Yarei Elokim has reference to Yisrael, not to Amalek. Didn't fear God. What's wrong with being tired and worn out? When you're worn out from doing work, that's a blessing. How are we to understand it? My uncle said there's a difference between Ayef Yageya and Yageya V'Ayef. Yageya, you're worn out and you become tired. We understand that. But you get Ayef Yageya, you start out tired and then you become Yageya. That's below your Elkin. What's the idea? But I think the idea is when you're Ayef Yageya, if you start off being tired and then you become worn out. If you start, that's not tired, physical tiredness, but that's tiredness of an attitude. It can be identified with depression. The Jewish people, when they went out from Egypt, they saw Kriyas Yamsuf. But nevertheless, they became a Ayef Yageya. It could be when they were in Egypt, they had to deal with so much that they didn't start out with the attitude of Ayef. Sometimes when you feel because of the burden that you're dealing with, you're not able to fall into depression. However, afterwards, the depression takes place. And that could be what happened to the Jewish people in Egypt. And then when they came to Rephidim, they said, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu u'mayin. Somehow all the miracles meant nothing to them anymore. Because it was an attitude of tiredness, an attitude of depression, when they should have been happy that they were freed from Egypt. And when they had an attitude, each step they took in the desert was one of depression. So much so that time and time again, when they rebelled, they would talk about what a glorious land Egypt was. So then, who comes? Then the Amalek comes. Amalek comes, and when it comes to Amalek, the Jewish people have to fight their own battle. In Egypt, the Jewish people didn't have to fight their own battle. It was Esther Makos. They sat back. They did nothing. And even the Yamsuf, okay, they had to go into the water. Can't say that they split the sea. They had to take a little initiative. But here they had to do the battle themselves. Because what is the cure for depression? Initiative. You have to take your own initiative. Depression it works on a person not to take an initiative. There's no purpose, there's no hope. And when we take our own initiative, there is purpose and there is hope. And undoubtedly, in a sense, but the Jewish people had to learn that even when they take their own initiative, they have to identify it with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to go, as I mentioned many times, on top of the mountain and raise his hands in prayer. When Moshe raised his hands, then the Jewish people were being victorious. When Moshe put his hands down, but Amalek was victorious. Because we could suggest Hakol Kol Yaakov V'Hayadayim Yedei Esav. Tefillah is identified with Kol. When it's just war, without the call of Tefillah, without the sounds of prayer, then Hayadayim Yedei Esav. But if it's a Kol Yaakov, the Jewish people had to recognize that their victory was associated with the tefillas that Moshe Rabbeinu did at that time. The Gemara so this and the battle of, especially by Milchemes Amalek, it's battle not just against the Jewish people, but it's a battle. It was a battle against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ain't Shmi Shalem, ain't Kisi Shalem, Ad Sheyamach Hashem Amalek Min Olam, God said. So the victory has to be associated with tefillah, because Amalek wants to stop the Jew. Why? Because the Jew is identified with God. The Jewish people are identified with God, and the Jewish people are identified with the name of God. But the name of God is not complete so long as the Amalek is in the world. Tishmeinu karasa b'shmecha. So in a sense, Tefillah offers us the hope of changing the situation. I want to suggest a new approach to Purim. What is the holiday of Purim? The holiday of Purim is not just the holiday of Mordechai and Esther, but it's much more than the holiday of Mordechai and Esther. It's the holiday of the survival of Golus. And according to many, there is a dispute about whether Hanukkah will be forever or not in Yemos HaMashiach. The simple reading is that it won't be forever. There are those who quote, and I have my doubts of that it was said, but there are those who quote that Moshe Feinstein said that Hanukkah will also be forever. But the Megillah tells us clearly about Purim, that Purim will be forever. What's the idea that Purim will be forever? It talks about the survival of the Jewish people throughout Golus. Because here, the Jewish people were facing extinction as a result of their exile, of Persian exile, we could call it, which was an outgrowth of Babylonian exile. And Purim is the celebration. That's why Purim for sure will be forever. And the Megillah says that the Purim will never leave the Jewish people, because the ultimate celebration of Purim will be when the Mashiach comes, when Golus will end forever. The Rambam Shita is that in the second base of Mikdash, they fasted on Tisha B'Av. Why did they fast on Tisha B'Av? Because he held like the Abarbanel. This is what I think. I've mentioned it before. The Abarbanel says that Tisha B'Av, that the second base of Mikdash, it was only one exile. He disagrees with the Ramban. It was one exile. The building of the second base of Mikdash was a lull in the exile. But because of that, there was according to the Rambam, even during Bayesheni, they had to fast on Tisha B'Av, and the other fast days were voluntary fast days, but they were certainly not holidays. But when will the holidays be? The holidays will be when the Golus will come to a complete end. That will be in the Yemos HaMashiach, in the time of Mashiach. And that's the analogy, I think, between the 4 fast days in Purim, because in a sense, they're both, on one hand, they're both celebrating the idea that as a result of the tefillas, we receive salvation. But as I mentioned, but more than that, that's why Tisha B'Av, according to many Rishonim, even in the second base of Mikdash, became a holiday. Even Tisha B'Av became a holiday in the second base of Mikdash. But according to the Rambam, it's the idea that we can go that Purim is a holiday celebrating our survival, going from a state of non-existence. It's not b'derech hateva that the Jewish people should be able to survive Golos. And this is the paraduma. The paraduma is somebody who came in contact with the dead. He has a different perspective of life. Life ceases to be to him a process of living. It becomes a process of dying. And the Jewish people, why did they build the Egel Azav? Because the Satan made it appear to them that Moshe Rabbeinu was dead. Chazal tell us, Kizeh Moshe heish lo yadanu mehayalo. So life became a process of dying. And very often when life becomes a process of dying, what does man do? Vayochlu, vayishtu, vayakumu litzachek. What did the Jewish people do when they built the Egel Azav? They ate, they drank, and they got up to be merry. As Epicurean said, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. When you see life as a process of dying, when you encounter death, there's a tendency sometimes to indulge because there's nothing more in life. So we fast, and we are in a state that tends to lead us into a state of depression. Golos has a tendency to give us a feeling of depression. But we have to take the initiative. And the initiative is to do more Torah and mitzvahs. The initiative is to learn as much as we can. The initiative is to bring about an end to the exile. The initiative is to help our brothers and sisters, both here and in Eretz Yisrael. The initiative is to help our brothers in the Eretz Yisrael who have to fight their enemies. We have to take an initiative, and we have to look forward to the coming of Mashiach. And we can have hope that that will be soon in our days. So in a sense, this is the connection. Purim is the celebration of the survival of exile. In exile, and according to the Rambam, the 4 Tzomos will become holidays because it'll be the celebration of the end of all the exiles. Okay.
If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. One question is, did Queen Esther herself decree the fast, or did Mordechai or the Sanhedrin at that time decree the fast and the holidays?
Okay, there's a discussion about that. It seems that the Klal Yisrael wanted it, and the Bezdin accepted it. And certainly Mordechai and Esther suggested it.
She didn't have the
Ibn Ezra says that it was not decreed by the Nevi'im, but it was accepted by Klal Yisrael. That's what Ibn Ezra and Esther says, and that's what he says. And these psukim actually, but you could say that it was something that Klal Yisrael wanted, and the Bezdin Hagadol accepted it, but it wasn't done derech nevuah. It was done by Bezdin. That the Rambam said, the Rambam is very clear that it was the Chachamim at that time, and Ubeinehem, and among them were some Nevi'im. The Anshe Knesset Hagdola. It was the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, and among them were Nevi'im. That's how the Rambam phrases it. The Ibn Ezra says that he goes out of his way, said it wasn't the Nevi'im that decreed it, but it was Klal Yisrael that accepted. So I don't know that if you have to make a machlokas between the Ibn Ezra and the Rambam, but those are the words they used. The Rambam says it was the Anshe Knesset Agdola, Beinehem Neviim, and the Ibn Ezra says it was Klal Yisrael. But it was certainly approved by the Anshe Knesset Agdola. Okay.
No other questions here. So everyone have an easy fast tomorrow and a happy Purim, whether you have that on Monday, on Tuesday or Wednesday, if you're in Yerushalayim.
Yeah. And next year's Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah.